Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, in a change to the previously announced programme, we will be building an atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert in Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, and then we'll be fighting to prevent a secret alien invasion of Earth in Marvel's Secret Invasion. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yep, I've been doing a comics reading project that I've been sort of meaning to do for a few years now. I've been reading the whole of Powers. This is a crime/superhero comic, a sort of cops investigate superhero-related crime series by Brian Michael Bendis and Michael Avon Oeming from, well, it began in the early 2000s and it has been running steadily sort of on and off around the creators' other projects ever since then for a total of 18 volumes until they published what has been described as maybe the last one a couple of years ago. And I finally picked up maybe the last one in a sale on the site formerly known as Comixology. So yeah, I thought I would sit down and read all 18 volumes of Powers, and as of this recording, I've just read volume 13. So I'm getting there. I'm over 2/3 through. And yeah, this is, as I say, this is a cop drama/superhero hybrid. This is about Detective Christian Walker and his new partner Dina Pilgrim, who work the Powers beat in the police departments in this, I think, unnamed fictional city. And it's a sort of New York, Chicago, Americana city, but yeah, I think it's unnamed. The first book is called Who Killed Retro Girl, which is a fairly straightforward sort of a big classic beloved superhero has been murdered, who did it? And then after that it goes off into a range of superpowers adjacent crimes, ranging from similar sort of whodunits to impressively they're quite willing to sort of go big on the genre in Powers. Like with the cop stuff, you always assume that because the goal is this sort of street level thing, it's always going to be sort of people stabbing each other in alleyways. But the fun of Powers is that it's quite willing to do, right, okay, there are these two people with like godlike powers, one of them has been murdered and now we need to go and talk to the gods about who did it. Or there's a storyline in Powers, and I won't spoil which one, where as a direct result of one of Christian Walker and Dina Pilgrim's botched investigations, the Vatican gets completely destroyed and the Pope gets burnt to death. It's yeah, it's very much willing to go big on the scale and acknowledge the scale of, you know, superheroes and superpowers and what they're dealing with.
Alright, that sounds really good. Yeah, sort of, I guess, genre-hopping hybrid of, like, yeah, crime and superheroes. Is it structured around, like, each case is a volume? Or is there, like, a series of Dexter or something when there's, like, a big mystery or murder of each season and then smaller mysteries kind of peppered within that?
It's more sort of each case is a volume of the book generally. Well, I mean, obviously each book is actually, like, 5 to 6 issues of the comic series normally. But yeah, each storyline in the comic is one volume and each volume is normally a case. But there's a lot of like character subplots running alongside the day-to-day casework. It's very sort of procedural in that way, at least in that way specifically. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff about Walker and Pilgrim's relationship, and like it's revealed quite early on in the first couple of issues of the first storyline that Christian Walker used to be a superhero before he lost his powers and became a cop instead. And there's a lot of stuff about that. There's some more revelations about Walker that I actually won't spoil because they're impressively ambitious and batshit and it would be a shame. But there's a lot of stuff based around his secrets, and later on, as Dina Pilgrim gets more and more into the sort of powers scene, she also builds up an impressive backlog of secrets. There's a lot of secrets and lies in Powers.
Right, so yeah, so there's kind of building up the sort of arc plot. I mean, again, like a lot of TV shows do when they kind of like add the layers of complexity as it goes along and they reveal more about the world and the kind of its intricacies.
Yeah, a lot of it is getting into the backlog of the world. It's as I say, it's a sort of fully populated superhero universe, including the sort of diversity of types of superpower you have. Like there's a storyline where they get into the sort of magic Doctor Strange-esque section of superheroes, which is obviously quite annoying if you're a police officer.
Yeah, I can imagine it's similar to, I guess, the MCU, how they kind of sit together, and if you don't think about it too much, the fact that, like, this universe contains, like, literal gods, people who do magic, aliens, and people who are basically wearing, like, high-tech armor.
Yeah, and people who can just stick to walls for some reason. Yeah, it's just got all that jammed together, and it's sort of on the understanding that yes, you know, if you could accept this in Marvel or DC, you could accept it here, and you know, because it's a series that's, you know, an original creation by Bendis and Oeming, they can actually kill people and advance the plot and make big changes to the world, and it actually feels like it matters and might not necessarily be reset at the end of the issue.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds good. Yeah. So this is concluded then.
Yeah, when the last volume came out in, I think, 2020, I think they said that this is either going to be the last volume ever or the last volume dealing with the sort of the central Walker Pilgrim arc. If they come back with powers, it's going to be a different take or with different characters or something. Or they might just never come back with it, but they finished this storyline for now.
Right. And it's consistent in terms of quality across the 13 volumes you've read so far?
Yeah, it's interesting how they managed to always come up with a slightly different take on this sort of super crime thing. I mean, Bendis, the writer, has his stuff reads very quickly. It's very, very cinematic. There's often a lot of double page spreads. There's a lot of quiet sequences with little or no words. So it does actually kind of read like each volume is basically an episode of a TV show, to be honest. It does basically feel like you're reading, a season, watch reading, a season of a very sort of fast-paced, exciting TV show. And he's very interested in sort of cutting to the exciting bits, I think. Like, there's often, 6 months or a year between, cases. It doesn't necessarily feel like you're coming back day after day after day. It feels like he's always very much cutting to the next, significance event.
That sounds good, yeah. I mean, I'm a fan of genre mashing and, detectives in, I guess, other settings other than, our world regular crime. I mean, one of the great things from a writer's perspective is putting, a detective in your story, making them the main character. It's just great for world building and exploration because detectives are people who go and shove their nose into other people's business. So it's a good, and they turn over stones and look for things. That's why a lot of, stories, it's good to have either detective or journalist as your main character.
Well, yeah, that and the fact that Walker has a lot of contacts in the superhero world from when he was a superhero, it makes it quite easy for him to just go anywhere and do everything. And yeah, it works pretty easily without having to faff around. I mean, there was a bit of a trend for superhero plus X comics around the 2000s when Powers started. I think Powers was, to be honest, one of the earlier first ones and probably one of the more successful ones. And then there was quite a lot of superhero plus espionage, superhero plus heist, superhero plus Indiana Jones, superhero plus anything else you can ram superheroes into, in an attempt to make the superhero obsessed audience of American comics buy something else, and
or at least have some kind of new stories or whatever rather than straight up superheroes.
Yeah, there was a series called Gotham Central, which was a sort of superheroes plus cops comic set in the Batman universe, actually using some of the famous Batman cops like Bullock and Montoya and Commissioner Gordon. I think I may have covered it on this podcast a few.
But it sounds a lot like
years
that
ago.
Gotham TV show they did that was like a crime procedure or something, wasn't it?
It's much better than that, but yeah. Yeah, Gotham Central's actually quite a different vibe to Powers. Gotham Central's a lot more concerned with the procedural crime, day-to-day, what's it like to be a cop stuff, whereas Powers, I think, is a bit more interested in the high-level, holy shit, what's happening stuff, the big murders, the big plot twists, the big sort of character secrets. It's a lot more dramatic, which is quite fun. Michael Oeming's got a very dynamic, exciting, sort of chunky animation style, which makes that stuff quite satisfying.
Oh, great. Well, yeah, sounds really good. Definitely one to add to the to-read list.
Yeah, no, it's good. I've got volumes 1 to 12 and 14 in print, so you can buy those if you want. That's a wedge of stuff to carry out. But yeah, no, it's a good comic. I think honestly it kind of just became part of the scenery, part of the furniture in comics to an extent, but it didn't always get that many props. But yeah, now that the storyline has allegedly finished, I'm enjoying going through it. Anyway, so that's me. What have you been doing?
So we're covering Oppenheimer, which we'll be discussing in a few minutes. But before that, I went to see the other half of the famous film duo that's taking the world by storm right now. So yeah, I went to the cinema to see Barbie, which overall I can really strongly recommend. It's really funny. It's got a great cast, especially the two leads are absolutely, just sort of in their element, doing great comedic performances. I think the film I'd probably liken it the most to recently is the Lego Movie. Not mainly because it's obviously based on a famous toy product, but it's got the same kind of vibe of basically it's bright, it's colourful, it's silly, it's got a really good density of jokes. It's really, really funny. But then it does also, when it needs to, pull out the sort of sincere emotional moments so that it's not, you have that, feeling of a deeper connection with the characters. So yeah, if anyone is on the fence about this film, I would definitely recommend going to see it.
I have not been able to see this film as my partner, who also wants to see it, has been ill. But yeah, no, I am up for this. It sounds like it's really good. It sounds like everyone has seen it, has had a lovely time.
Yeah, well, due to its popularity, I think it'll be around for a while. Yeah, so I went and did the Barbie Oppenheimer day on the day of release, and based on the amount of people in central London dressed in hot pink and queuing to the cinema, I think that Barbie is probably definitely winning the competition to who gets the most people in, although I guess less people are dressing up to see Oppenheimer, although I did see some people wearing black 1940s suits, clearly on Team Oppenheimer.
I feel like it was never really a competition, was it? I mean, I know Nolan and possibly also nuclear bombs have their fans, but I think Barbie was always a bigger, popular event.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a 12A, not a 15 so more people can see it.
It's not a 3-hour, quite talky political biopic.
No, it's got a much bigger marketing budget and advertising a lot more. But it is a good film, and it was good to see them both in the same day. Definitely do Barbie second, which is what I did, because you kind of want the funny one on the end rather than the depressing one. But I think I really enjoyed seeing it in the cinema, and I would recommend certainly seeing Barbie in the cinema just for that communal experience of like laughing with other people. It makes it just so much funnier, like sharing a room with other people and all reveling in the humour with strangers. There's something communal about that kind of enhances the experience of watching the film.
It seems like fun. I have enjoyed seeing everyone's photos of them getting into the pink Barbie box and stuff. Yep. I'm excited to get down there and join in.
Yeah. Picture House Central had a pink Barbie box as well. There's also a lot of great cameos. I did love watching the brief cameos from lots of famous people playing various different Barbies and Kens. Some very, very odd Barbies and Kens that have existed in the past. When you're watching it, keep your eyes peeled for like little people who pop up quickly, familiar faces you'll recognise.
Yeah, no, I do remember. It seems like a huge amount of famous, beloved actors are playing background Barbies and Kens, so I assume that'll be fun.
Yeah, I can imagine there's like a gazillion of little nods, especially if you know the history of Mattel and and the products and stuff, but there's probably like lots and lots of bits in the background, different like versions of the Barbie dream house and the car and things like that. So it's something I'm sure that like Barbie scholars will be picking over for a long time.
I can't say I'm looking forward to the swamp of films based on niche toys and attempts to counter-program films against each other that we're now going to get for the next year or two.
No, I mean, these things always have diminishing returns, don't they?
But yes, this sounds like fun.
Yeah. Although a lot of people have been joking that we should get Mike Leigh to do a Cindy film. If you remember, Cindy was like the British version of Barbie, but like it was just kind of much, more kitchen sink. Like she came with like cleaning products. And I think there was a Cindy dream house, but it was like a 2 Up 2 Down in Manchester, not like a modernist palace that Barbie lives in.
I do remember Cindy. I didn't realise that was the British one specifically, but I do remember Cindy being the less successful version of Barbie.
Yeah, and just the generally more, like I say, kitchen sink Barbie. So yeah, maybe that would be funny. Or at least that could be at least a good comedy sketch.
Was it people saying Lena Dunham is doing Polly Pockets, or was that a joke? I honestly can't tell anymore.
I mean, at this point, it might be real. It might not be real. Who knows?
I mean, by the time the strike's finished, it might have gone from real to not real.
Yeah. Or out of desperation the other way, who knows? Or it's just a Twitter joke that's got out of hand. It's happened before.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, Barbenheimer was a Twitter joke got out of hand, but happily for once, not in a depressing way.
Not in a depressing way. And also, I do think it was just great to see people just out there enjoying the cinema. Yeah, really celebrating the art of seeing films on the big screen in person. I mean, my local cinema, which is like a chain cinema, has closed recently just due to lack of attendance. I don't want cinema to become like incredibly niche and very expensive because, there'll probably always be people who want to go to the cinema, but it might become a thing just for basic kind of like beard scratching, arty middle class intellectual types and very expensive and quite niche. Whereas, I kind of wanted cinema to be for everyone and there to be films for everyone. But the fact that people, this has been a huge success, I guess, is a real vote of confidence for seeing films in person and things like that. So, that kind of gave me some warm feelings about the future.
Yeah, especially after a few, I gather, underwhelming blockbusters. Certainly I didn't go and see any of them. So yeah, well done, cinema.
Yeah. So that's the Barbie part of Barbenheimer. Now on to the Heimer part.
Okay, cool. Shall I insert a jingle here? Or?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
You can edit that out if it sounds absolutely shite.
I'm clearly going to keep it in.
Okay.
Okay, and now obviously we're going to talk about Barbenheimer Part 2, aka Oppenheimer. This is, of course, as I said a few minutes ago, a 3-hour, quite talky biopic of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientist best known for working on the Los Alamos project that created the first ever atomic bomb. This is a film directed by Christopher Nolan, covering Oppenheimer's life from the early days of his career right up to his work on the bomb and beyond to the political fallout of that. It features Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer, and much like we were saying about Asteroid City the other week, there's a who's who of I know that person in this film. I guess the biggest co-stars are probably Emily Blunt as his wife, Matt Damon as General Groves, who's overseeing the project, and Robert Downey Jr. as his political nemesis. But there are, as I say, a lot of famous people in this. There's also Florence Pugh as Jean Tatlock. Josh Hartnett has a decent level background part. Kenneth Branagh's in this. Many, many people. And yes, we have seen it. I narrowly slipped it in yesterday. Alastair, what did you think of it?
Yeah, so Christopher Nolan does tense thrillers really, really well. And yeah, he's crafted a very, very tense thriller here. It is long, but it's well paced, I felt, at least overall, and we can get into the details of that. But overall, it's just a very, very tense film, and I did really feel heart-clenching tension throughout. The most tense part is probably the middle to two-thirds bit when they're actually building and testing the bomb. And I think it's pretty impressive what they've done, because we know what happens. Like, they built the bomb, it worked, and then they used it in a war. But still, they managed to get a lot of tension about the process of building the bomb. Will it work? Everything that goes into it, and also the things that they were concerned about at the time, such as maybe it'll ignite the atmosphere and burn up the entire world. And yeah, we obviously know these things didn't happen, or we know that they were successful. But there's still a lot of tension in it. So I really thought that was well done. Great performance from Cillian Murphy. The second chunk of the story, which is the kind of last bit, because Christopher Nolan loves to play around with time, is a different type of tension. I did think it was good, but probably the height was in the two-thirds middle bit. But yeah, overall, I thought another cinematic thriller done very well by Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed this a lot. This is probably the best Christopher Nolan movie since his Dark Knight Inception heyday. I may need to sit with it a bit more to start making best ever pronunciations, but it's certainly up there with his best. It's, yeah, as you say, it's got a good sort of tense thriller pacing that means that even though this film is 3 hours long, I'm actually not going to complain about the runtime. I was pretty much on the edge of my seat watching it throughout. He does a very good job of sustaining the tension, even though, especially the first hour or so, really is just, apart from a few sort of ominous cutaways and noises, really is mostly just people in rooms talking. But because he's able to really weaponize, I guess, the fact that, this is the dawn of nuclear weaponry, this is a moral shift, this is a big move in our collective psyche, a big moment in history, this is something that's been played as a genuine, dawn of evil, opening of the gates of hell in various bits of media. I think Twin Peaks did it a few years ago, and many others have done it. Yeah, it's one of these things where, the pretentious filmmaker has got something that he can actually justify being pretentious about, and it works. It's like we've said many things about various Aaron Sorkin things, where his stuff and his sort of lofty tones works a lot better when he's dealing with something where, it's not slightly laughable that he's being so lofty about it. Like, say, The West Wing. But anyway, I'm not going to spend this review talking about Aaron Sorkin, although this film structurally does kind of resemble The Social Network, but I don't think that's because there's much actual borrowing between the two. I think it's just because, it's a biopic, and this is one of the recognised ways one does biopics, by having a sort of hearing/reckoning in the future, which gives you an excuse to show the man sort of looking back on his life, which, is what The Social Network did and is what Oppenheimer is doing. Yeah, it has a lot of weight to it. It has a lot of tension, which I think is justified by the sheer heaviness of what he's talking about. But I really enjoyed it. I was constantly focused on it throughout.
Yeah, I think the court setting of well, it's kind of similar to a court, but it's the confirmation hearing for Robert Downey Jr.'s character. And so, yeah, they point out several times it's not a court and you don't have the legal powers in the same way a court does. And also that's cross-cut with Oppenheimer having a deposition as well that's not a court but also treated like a court. And obviously those are good structural ways to analyse, the events, how things can come up in the course of the legal proceedings that leads to questions, which then, as people give the answers, you kind of see the events they're referring to. I mean, it's all part of Christopher Nolan's love to play around with time. I mean, that's the most consistent theme and also kind of narrative trick across his whole oeuvre of films. They're usually not told in the chronological order or in the same order. There's usually a lot of cross-cutting. Playing around with the nature of time itself is usually part of it, which he does here, mainly moving between the black and white and the colour sections. I think it's handled well here in that you get the through thread of a story coming through this, and it's not as confusing as sometimes like with Tenet.
No, I mean, I think for all that I made my remark a few seconds ago about Nolan being pretentious, this is actually one of his, more straightforward films in a lot of ways, It's a biopic, as I said. It's structured like a lot of biopics are. It moves more or less chronologically through his life in terms of its sort of main narrative scenes. Yes, there's a lot of cutaways, and to be honest, there are moments towards the end when he was really moving between the coloured and black and white sequences at speed and delivering a lot of quite quick dialogue explaining what was going on, when I was a bit sort of, wait, what? Okay, yep, sure. Which time frame am I in now? What's this explaining? Who's that? Yep, sure. Yeah, it does verge on getting confusing. Not helped by the fact that everyone in this film is a white man with brown hair. Although it does kind of help that every single one of them is played by someone I recognise. Like, I suppose I could complain about the fact that everyone is someone I recognise, because it does create a lot of, wait, who's that? But on the other hand, it does mean that when the one who's played by Kenneth Branagh shows up, I can at least remember it's the one played by Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah, I mean, it's a phenomenal cast he's put together, and there's a huge range of characters, which, yeah, I mean, I would like to see it again to make sure I've got every ins and outs of especially the kind of legal bits later on in the film. I've got them all straight in my head. There's a lot of people in that, and I do think it's, really impressive how Nolan has managed to condense down what is quite a complicated history. Obviously, it was a huge project, the Manhattan Project. A lot of people worked on it. A big range of people, and then, and lots of physicists contributed in some way. And they bring all of that in, and it's not confusing, and it's handled well with a big cast and lots of characters, and getting the complexity of not only the physics, conveying enough of the physics so you understand what they're trying to do and the tensions involved, but also getting across all the people involved, the political elements, the moving parts, kind of getting all that in and still finding, making it fit together into a dramatic film is quite an accomplishment.
Like, all the individual scenes are quite, well structured. There's not a lot of, rambling or exposition here. A lot of the scenes are quite snappy. A lot of it is just condensing these big moments, which were probably, in reality, hours of meetings and reams of paperwork, to just someone going, build him a town or something, and that's it. And they just build this town in the desert.
Yeah.
And it works. Again, it's Nolan doing sort of good cinematic shorthand and turning this into an actually dramatic film.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And, they bring in loads of stuff about the history of quantum physics, which is kind of, the big sort of thing in the early mid part of the 20th century that physicists were exploring. Obviously, lots of famous people turn up, including, obviously Einstein, you've seen in the trailer, but also, Heisenberg and people like that. So, there's a veritable who's who of famous physicists. Fermi as well, again. I mean, a lot of people who are also in the Manhattan Project's comic. So
Good comic.
Yeah.
Interesting watching this, knowing most of the characters primarily from that. But yeah, Cillian Murphy's performance it's great, actually. He's really, really good. There's a certain sort of weird, single-minded arrogance that he manages to convey without being completely unlikable. Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah, he's that anchor that kind of holds the film together. It's his story and kind of it's built around him. So you're always coming back to him and you're focused on him. And and his performance rises to the need to bring this film together. Yeah, and he portrays the character with emotional complexity, hinting at the darker things going on beneath the surface, his concerns about the weapon that he created, kind of awesome destructive power. Yeah, there's really a lot of complexity, and he portrays also arrogant genius quite well, and basically it's nothing like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. There was definitely a phase of portraying famous historical people as basically Sheldons. I mean, most notably, I think Turing in that film, the Imitation Game. Also, World War II thriller about technological breakthroughs. But this, he's managed to find a way to portray the character that feels, first of all, more genuine, but also, it has sort of more nuance to it as well.
Yeah, and also I think the film is quite good about not really coming down on a hard, unnuanced opinion on whether he was, quote, a goodie or a baddie. Like, it doesn't really honestly have a hard opinion on that. I think he's just a guy, and it's quite impressive that it's actually managed to hang on that. Some might say that that's fence sitting, but I liked it.
Well, it's also engaging with the complexity of reality. People are rarely all good or bad in reality. And it's also sort of bleeds into the kind of big debates which they get into the film as well. Yeah, as well as cramming in the history, the complex physics, they also get in the moral debate about, is it right to use such a weapon, and the debate over whether it was necessary to use it to end the Second World War. And also the big question of who's responsible. Like, Oppenheimer feels responsible. The film also says that, Truman feels responsible. Well, probably is more responsible. It was his decision. Oppenheimer just built the device and then spent his time after that trying to prevent the bombs from getting more powerful and working to prevent their proliferation. And so it gets in these complex debates. It also talks about bits about the Second World War that are overlooked a lot, especially in historical films, such as the firebombing campaign is mentioned, and I think it does say at one point that more people were killed in the American firebombing campaign of Japan than in the use of nuclear weapons. It addresses all these complicated things that were going on as well, brings them in, and then uses each one to create both drama, tension, and it uses them to create drama, tension, and enlighten you about the characters. So that's kind of again, great storytelling.
And, not everyone could be, an amazing, nuanced character. I think Robert Downey Jr. is somewhat playing a baddie, but he does so in a non-pantomime enough way that it still works. Yeah,
and there's some good twists involving his character later on in the film that add that kind of extra dramatic punch at the end bit after the kind of, what happened with the bomb, but then there's still brings in some more late film twists that kind of, keep you going, hooked until the end, until the credits roll.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's why the drama works that way, isn't it? You could maybe in your first early thoughts think, well, obviously it will end with a big nuclear explosion, but then again, everyone knows there's going to be a nuclear explosion. What happened to him afterwards is probably less well known and therefore, in some ways, more dramatic.
Yeah, so that's the right decision to have that as the events at the end of the film. So the whole thing is well structured and stuff. That's how you are able to get in all these complicated stuff, everything from explaining physics, the war, let's say the political debates, the moral debates. How they're able to get it all in is because, just kind of getting your kind of your filmmaking nuts and bolts right. Yeah, kind of structure, tension, character, and then once you've nailed that, you can then pile complexity on top of it, and the structure is strong enough to take the weight.
I mean, he does sort of poke at the way that a lot of people have used, like, the creation of the nuclear weapon, but like, oh my god, it's the dawn of evil, it's the beginning of the end, it's like truly massive apocalyptic stuff. But he doesn't linger on it that much, to the extent that when he does finally hit it, which is quite close to the end of the film, it does actually stick with you. Before that, it's just kind of there's this good use of like sound, I think, these sort of weird apocalyptic noises that occasionally just thunder off during the film, and it's this sort of thing that you can sort of think about, and it's this sort of sense of dread. But the film doesn't actually start, talking about it very much for most of its running time.
Yeah, well, what's quite a good sort of metaphor they use is as I alluded to earlier, is there's the debate they had, well, there's a possibility that when they test the bomb, it might ignite the atmosphere and destroy the whole world. So there's a lot of people saying, when we press that button, we might destroy the world. And obviously you're thinking, well, we know that they didn't literally destroy the world, but what they mean is when I open the door to the atomic age, we might destroy the world. And, it's still not guaranteed to this day that a process that will destroy all life on Earth and the entire human race was not began on that day. That's a convoluted way of saying it. But there is a possibility that Oppenheimer did destroy the world. If we do all die in a nuclear firestorm, it would be the end of a process that he began. So, and we, as the audience, we're aware of that when they're saying, I press that button, I might destroy the world, it's not necessarily in that next few moments, but, and it works on that kind of metaphorical level.
Yeah, and Nolan's achievement there is, again, he's willing to be somewhat restrained about it and make what is, for the most part, a fairly straight biopic, albeit with a few slightly gimmicky time jumps, rather than really having the gates of hell shimmering around the side of the screen or something.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I spent a long time praising this film. I think it's very, very good. Right now it's sitting pretty high on my list of favourite films from this year. There are a few things that I felt were a bit silly or maybe could be rethinking. I did like Florence Pugh's performance, and I thought she was an interesting character. I thought some of the sex stuff was just like kind of a bit silly, really. Like, especially like there's a bit when he almost imagines having sex in the hearing room, and it's just a bit kind of like, what? Like, it's just kind of unnecessary. And there's various scenes of the characters naked. And I know some people said it's like gratuitous, but I thought it was a bit silly because the Florence Pugh character, she's a psychologist and she's asking him probing psychological questions, and then he's like psychologically naked in front of her, and I was like, this is a quite obvious, quite shallow visual metaphor that's kind of not really befitting the rest of the film. So I kind of felt that it's a shame that it treated the physics, the history and the politics and the moral debates with a kind of a deft hand exploring the complexity, but some of the psychology was just kind of shunted in with kind of all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. So that could have been better.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 3-hour film, I guess, but I mean, Christopher Nolan isn't, I guess, best known for his deft handling of matters of sexuality and or female characters in general. So I guess no one had high expectations of that, and to an extent he's just swerved around it for a lot of the film.
Yeah. I hasten to add that it didn't spoil my enjoyment of the film. I did think it was a weakness that the silliness of being physically naked and psychologically naked sort of did deflate the tension a bit.
Yeah, the bit where he imagines being naked in front of the committee was a bit sort of high school movie, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just too on the nose, isn't it? Yeah.
It's not really quite in line with the rest of this relatively serious adult biopic, but sure. I mean, as far as I can tell, the bit where he's naked in front of the committee was him feeling naked, and the bit where Florence Pugh is also naked with him in front of the committee is his wife imagining it or something. It's all very unsubtle.
Yeah, it's all very unsubtle. However, I do think that Florence Pugh plays the part well, and she works well with what she's given the script. I also thought Emily Blunt was very good playing his wife. Yeah, and works well with what she's given from the script. So the women in the film are certainly performing well. It's just a shame that let down maybe a bit by the script and the directing, but that's not to say it distracted from my enjoyment of the film overall, which I still think is very good.
Yeah, as I say, there's 3 hours of this. The bits that don't work are relatively few minutes in comparison. I think this is probably still going to go down as one of the better films of the year. Okay, and now, having spoken about a very good media release that is probably going to be among the best of the year, we are happy to present you with an alternative. Yes, it's Marvel's Secret Invasion, a 6-issue miniseries about a group of renegade Skrulls who have gotten sick of Fury trying to find them a new home, like he said he would at the end of Captain Marvel, and have decided to just invade and take ours instead. but being Skrulls, whose main superpower is turning into other people, they're doing their invasion secretly, hence the title. This is, of course, a Disney Plus miniseries starring Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, Olivia Colman as Sonya Falsworth, Ben Mendelsohn as Talos from Captain Marvel, and Kingsley Ben-Adir as Gravik, the evil Skrull leader. And yes, we have watched all 6 episodes of this recent Marvel miniseries. Alastair, what did you think?
Well, I bounced off this pretty hard, as the kids say, I believe. Not that I know what the kids say, really. I think my main criticism was that I wasn't particularly emotionally invested in kind of any of the characters. You've got Samuel L. Jackson playing your main character, who is pretty reliably entertaining and even like captivating, even sometimes in like a bad film or a bad script. But it just felt like he was, I don't know, I don't want to say I'm going to say it. It felt like he was phoning it in, not sort of putting a lot of effort to entertain. There wasn't a lot of character growth or development. There was some interesting action scenes, but generally I felt, I don't know, I'm not really invested in this story. Olivia Colman did a good turn, but other than that, it was just, I don't know, a bit of a, I'm not sure why I care.
Yeah, I also did not love this. It had the vague vibe of a below average season of Spooks with an unusually high budget cast, but weirdly quite a low budget in most other areas. After talking last episode about how Silo lacked a strong character or plot, but at least had a bit of, momentum and pacing in the exciting parts, this show also doesn't have that. If I had to identify the biggest weakness of this show, it's the sort of slack plotting, the sense that people are just sort of wandering from one scene to another with very little sense of like momentum or excitement. Everything's just so dum 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 dum. Someone walks into a room, maybe they'll shoot each other, they leave. It's all just very, not a lot going on, not a lot of stakes, not a lot of excitement. Some of the cast do their best. Samuel L. Jackson, although as Alastair said, he's not exactly on his blistering best here. He has a few scenes where he at least gets to give a nice little speech or something. Olivia Colman's trying hard. Kingsley Ben-Adir, who I've seen before in I think the OA Season 2, he's a good actor, and I think he has a certain sort of quiet intensity that he does manage to deploy a bit in this villain part. There's a couple of bits where he's sort of sitting in the Skrull canteen, dominating the room just by being there. I think he's got a lot of presence, and hopefully there's a smart casting director watching this who will snap him up for a better project. But yeah, overall, a lack of momentum here. Not a great thing.
Yeah, I thought he was good as the villain, and he has this sort of smouldering sense of threat. He sort of radiates out to the other characters. He does sort of menacing very well. Weirdly, he was also one of the main Kens in Barbie, so watching in the same week him doing kind of 2 very different performances was a bit of a head turn. But it goes to show that he is talented. Yeah, it's just that the script and the sort of setting kind of let him down. Yeah, they also made the kind of slightly odd decision to introduce like a MacGuffin called the Harvest, like about halfway through, which just kind of again contributed to the fact that there's overall feeling the plot didn't really have a direction. You've kind of got, I guess, the secret invasion of the title, but I wasn't exactly clear how the invasion was progressing other than a generic kind of make the humans fight each other plan, and then with some other like sci-fi MacGuffins thrown in. Again, as you said, it's just kind of lacks sort of structure and direction. Yeah,
I mean, the original point of the secret invasion storyline in the comics, which I have read, albeit about 9 or 10 years ago now, was this sort of anyone could be a Skrull, who do you trust vibe, which relied on sort of them being willing to bring in like a lot of big existing characters because it was like a big crossover, so everyone could be in it, and like reveal that some of them were actually Skrulls and had been for a while. Like I think they revealed that Elektra, the Daredevil love interest, had been a Skrull and had been infiltrating a ninja clan, and I think the Jessica Drew Spider-Woman, who hasn't been in any MCU stuff, was also a Skrull. And yeah, there was a certain willingness to out big characters as Skrulls and reveal that the last few years of their actions had been part of the Skrull secret invasion, and those bits worked. I mean, that storyline had its weaknesses, but the fundamental premise is quite cool. And yeah, they're not really doing that here.
Yeah, they sort of did it a bit at first and then kind of like dropped that. Again, that's a pretty good idea, and I thought that that's where it was going from the first like episode. But then it sort of just came down to some sort of the same characters in rooms talking. There weren't really many twists. I mean, this kind of has the feel of a sort of quite generic spy thriller, but without the twists and betrayals you expect from like a spy film. Like no one's revealed to be a double agent really at much points, or things like that. The kind of basic kind of 101 of like spy stuff.
And the trouble with playing this as a serious spy film is the betrayals don't really have as much power if they're just a Skrull. If a character betrays you and it turns out the reason they betrayed you is because they're actually a Skrull, then there's not much emotional investment there, is there? There's no, oh Frank, how could you? Because, Frank didn't do it. Frank's locked up in a basement somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a Skrull. The Skrull was always going to betray you.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a few characters, I don't know if it's necessarily spoiling it, they are revealed to be Skrulls, but then it just turns them from a goodie into a baddie, rather than like having any emotional or moral complexity to it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'll wait a minute or two and then drop a spoiler wall before going into the specifics of that, I guess. So yeah, that bit doesn't quite work. They introduce a previously unseen wife for Nick Fury, which is not a bad idea if this is meant to be the show that finally digs under his skin a bit. But they don't really sell the relationship enough for me to care, sadly. The actress playing the wife has a bit of presence, but I don't think they really give her enough time with Samuel L. Jackson to really sell the relationship.
No, it goes back to the fact that I just do not feel emotionally invested in these characters, like, at all. There's also, the show is, like, tonally quite odd in that this has none of the humour that we kind of associate with Marvel products, but it's not really got anything to put in its place. Like, it doesn't have the tension. They weren't like doing like a serious spy thing that has like tension and dramatic betrayals, you know, Mission Impossible style heists or anything like that. They're just kind of taking the humour out in an attempt to be more serious, but not really put anything in its place.
Yeah, they tried to do something not entirely dissimilar in Falcon Winter Soldier, except they kept some of the humour. But they did attempt to do this is a semi-serious political thriller. And I didn't think it entirely works there, and it works even less here.
Yeah.
They just don't quite have enough weight to this. I mean, I saw someone, and I don't know if it was an official person or just some blog, say that this was trying to be, Marvel's Andor, the slightly more somber one where they address real-world issues in a sort of metaphorical way. And I'm afraid they're just being a bit too vague. It just doesn't have enough specificity to actually feel like it's really about anything, except for the fictional Skrulls, and I don't have that much invested in the fictional Skrulls.
Yes, and also it's a bit deflated by the fact that it's in the MCU, and there's a lot of debates like, humans won't share this planet with aliens, and we're like, isn't there like an Asgard city in like Norway now, which they revealed in like the previous films, and everyone's like going there and shaking hands with the Asgards and doing selfies with them, and everyone's all like happy. Like, I know, I guess the thing about the Marvel stuff is that you kind of have to take each thing on its like own premise, as well as it being part of the wider MCU. You have to like accept that like this is a spy thriller, but obviously if Doctor Strange were just to walk in, he'd be like, right, I can just show you who everyone's a Skrull is using magic, job done. But you have to accept that he's not there, and like it's got to be bought on its own premise. But it does that kind of deflate the political and moral points they're trying to make, which is, the whole, humans are inherently kind of tribal and nasty to each other, and like we can't just bring an alien population to live on Earth. Look at the way humans treat other humans. And the Skrulls kind of saying like, humans are terrible to each other. Wouldn't it be better if we just wiped them out and looked after this planet instead? But it's sort of like deflated by the wider world building of the MCU.
Yeah, there's a couple of exchanges, but they attempt to reckon with why hasn't Fury just called the Avengers? And they'd have been better off not bothering, because they have no good answer.
Which is, I feel that like the MCU has to just basically entirely ignore the idea that, for example, like in Black Widow, when the villain is just like a dude in a suit, that like Doctor Strange or Captain Marvel could pancake that person in a second. Yeah, but it kind of deflates attention when your hero is a super spy with some great kung fu, but like not with like magical powers or like space weapons. But you just have to like accept it. They're like, look, this is a spy film for now, and then this spy may also at some point be fighting an alien in a future property. You just have to accept it. And it's better if they don't discuss it at all, because the more they point towards it, the more I can feel the simulation crumbling around me, and I'm aware I'm in the Matrix or whatever.
Yeah. I don't know, I'm not an avid reader of the day-to-day coverage of people speculating about what the executives at Marvel are currently thinking, so God knows what people think this all means. I gather Disney are starting to regret making these Marvel spin-off shows and might be, winding down the program, and this does have the slight air of we've somewhat stopped caring about it. Because it just feels like a first draft at times, to be honest, guys. There's just a lot of dialogue that just does not sing.
Yeah. Sort of exposition-heavy dialogue.
Oh yeah, I'll drop a brief spoiler wall to talk about the like one or two major Skrull reveals, I guess.
If for some reason you've listened to this review this far and you decided you want to watch the show without spoilers, then I guess now is your point to jump off. But yeah.
Oh, off you go. You're not going to miss much. The show's nearly over. In the middle of this, Don Cheadle, Colonel Rhodes, is revealed to be a Skrull. I think based on some implications towards the end, and to be honest, I had to go and read an interview with the director to actually settle this. He has apparently possibly been a Skrull since shortly after Civil War. Possibly the idea is that, he was severely injured in Civil War.
Yeah,
Possibly the idea is that the reason he then weirdly quickly recovered from that is because he didn't, and the one that appeared after that recovered was actually a Skrull.
Right.
To be honest, that's more interesting than most of the things that happen in this show, and they should probably have explored that more.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of flew over my head. I mean, I did notice that they'd retconned out his kind of spinal injury, but I just assumed, look, it's the MCU. I'm not sure, like, at some point, Nick Fury's eye came back.
Yeah, no, apparently it was all... I don't know, either it was all a big plan, and they knew he was a Skrull all along, or they've decided that actually we did walk past that weirdly quickly. Let's turn back on this and explain that actually that was the part of the plan.
Right, okay, well, it doesn't sing or doesn't land with a punch.
It might have landed if there'd been like one scene where Rhodey actually has some dialogue about it, but there's just one bit where you see him being helped out of the machine and he can't really walk.
Yeah.
Which I guess is meant to be the clue that he never actually recovered from his injuries, but it's not tackled.
And no one points out at any point, like, you can walk again, mate. That was a good recovery.
But in fairness to them, he's been walking around in at least 2 or 3 projects since then. He was in Winter Soldier, wandering around happy.
Yes, he was. I think it goes back to what you're saying, that if you reveal like a character we all like was actually a Skrull all along, it loses the emotional impact of, you know, that character actually betraying someone. You know, yeah, there's no emotional weight to it. There's also the fact that because the characterization's a bit shonky on the show, they turned him into a generic baddie who's just kind of whispering in the ears of the president, trying to get him to do bad things and just generally being nasty to the heroes. Like, he was one of like the nicer Avengers. He wasn't like a kind of Tony Stark insulting other people's intelligence. Now he's gone from being a nice guy to being a nasty guy. So, which is the kind of most transparent, that guy's actually a Skrull and not the same person.
Oh yeah, plus, you know, before he's revealed to be a Skrull in this, he's still being written as vaguely sympathetic, like the bit where he talks to Nick Fury in a diner and fires him, which is actually one of the better scenes in this show, to give it its limited amount of credit. He's written as still vaguely sympathetic, you know, he's trying to break it to him gently, he's trying to empathise with him. Like, shortly later, he's revealed to be a Skrull, and yeah, after that, he's basically written as a villain.
What we said about the Falcon and Winter Soldier show was that when this one came out of the oven, it wasn't quite done yet, and I feel that this one is definitely not done when it came out of the oven. Yeah, the Disney competence machine really did falter, sputter, and fall over this time.
Yeah, it's a below-average Marvel show. In fact, it may even be a flat-out bad Marvel show.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Try again. I'm sure we'll still watch Loki Season 2 anyway.
Yeah, if you were sitting on the fence on this one, then I wouldn't.
No, I mean, I gather Nick Fury's back in the Marvels later this year, which I'm still hoping might be good, because I liked the Ms. Marvel show. And maybe they'll acknowledge this in a couple of lines. Maybe they won't.
That's all we have time for in this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you have enjoyed the show, then please leave us a review in your podcatcher of choice. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio content, and read short written pieces by Nick and myself.
You can also follow us on social media, where we are Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook and MFV Podcast on Twitter, X, whatever it's called by the time this comes out. We may well eventually feel we should establish a presence on some other social network, but we haven't done that yet. I, however, am NickMB on Twitter, nickbryan.com on Instagram, and Nick Bryan on Blue Sky. Those seem to be the main ones I am actually using for now. Tune in next episode to find out which social networks I'm using then.
Yes, you can also find more from me on X or Twitter or whatever we're going to call it, where I'm at Alastair J.R. Ball. I'm also Alastair J.R. Ball on Blue Sky, and I'm Alastair Ball on Threads.
For God's sake.
Yeah, it's just all over the place. And also, I'm Alastair Ball on Instagram. None of that is particularly interesting. If you do want more from me, I recommend you go to my website, which is redtrainblog.com, which is where I put other bits of writing that, if you're interested in my take on other things. You can also join us here next time for the next episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, when we'll be discussing They Cloned Tyrone, a modern take on the blaxploitation sci-fi film from Netflix, and we'll also be discussing Extraction 2, also from Netflix, the Chris Hemsworth Muscle Man sequel to Extraction 1. So join us in 2 weeks' time. Until then, have a good one, and goodbye.
Bye.